Welcome to Liberate Your People Pleaser. I am your host, Brenda Florida, certified life coach, and you might be a people pleaser if you sacrifice your needs or your wants or your feelings to benefit someone else, or you keep silent when something bothers you or upsets you, or you're super critical and feel like you're probably your own worst enemy. Well, here's what I've got in store for you for this podcast. First of all, there's nothing wrong with you and you don't need fixing. What we need to do is leverage the superpowers of being a people pleaser, because there are definite superpowers. You are super intuitive, I am sure. You have great powers of empathy, the ability to read a situation and know what's going on with people and those around you. So what we're going to do in each episode is talk about ways to disempower the parts of it that are diminishing and don't serve us anymore, and level up or empower all those superpowers. So join me in the next episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. In this podcast episode, we're going to talk about one of the things that I find with my clients to be the biggest obstacle to their ability to really set boundaries and prioritize themselves, even whether that's self-care or making their opinions count the same as someone else's, their voice be as important as someone else's. And that thing is empathy, actually. So on the one hand, normally I am talking about how important empathy is and what a great skill empathy is. And that actually for people pleasers, because most of us have a lot of empathy as sort of a natural outcome of the things that, caused us to become people pleasers, and that's one of our superpowers. But, even Superman had his kryptonite. So empathy can be both a superpower and a kryptonite. And let me tell you why. I've got so many clients, maybe every single client I have right now, who is getting tripped up in their life because of empathy, or they're getting overwhelmed in their life because their empathy has kind of no boundaries of its own. So when you're naturally sensitive to the needs of others, or naturally sort of intuitive, or we won't argue whether that's natural or we were sort of conditioned into that. But at this point in our adult lives, it feels very natural for us, right? For me, it is empathy. I never used to label it as that, but for me, what I used to call it is just like, almost like I have a sixth sense for what needs to happen, what somebody needs. I'm really good at anticipating the needs of a person or an organization. It's why I was very successful in the real estate business, yada, yada. But let me give you a story. And so if you want to put on your headphones, you can. The story's going to have a few colorful adjectives in it, because it's very germane to the story. And I have a potty mouth anyway. I just haven't tended to swear much on these podcasts. So if that's disappointing to you, I'm sorry. So I haven't listed them as adult content, but here we go. So I had this situation that is just it's such a perfect story, I think, to really show you what I'm talking about here, and how empathy ends up being our kryptonite instead of our superpower. So I was dating somebody. This was about 5 years ago. I've been single for most of the last 20 years. So we're going to have some podcasts on dating and things like that as well coming up. But anyway, so I had just started dating this guy. I think it had been just 2 or 3 weeks. Anyway, we had and it was going very well, right? Like we had a lot in common. We were having a lot of fun. He was a good communicator. Things physically were good between us. You can read between the lines there. And so anyway, we took a trip up to New York. This was when I lived in Pennsylvania. So we go up to New York. We had this really fun day making wine at a winery, da da da. And on our way home, just the way he drove to my apartment was very strange to me. So we're very close to my apartment, and he doesn't turn where I thought he was going to turn. So questioned something about that, and then he did turn somewhere where I didn't think he was going to turn. Like it was just weird to me the way he was going to my place, and so I asked again a second time. Imagine that, about the way he was driving to my house. And he pulled up in front of my apartment and told me to shut the fuck up. And I mean, he was angry. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't, a sense of humor or sarcasm that I didn't understand yet because we hadn't been dating that long. This was anger, and I knew it. I mean, energetically, 99% of the time, whether somebody's playing with you with a because I'll say shut the fuck up all the time, but I mean it more as like a joke, right? Not because I'm mad at you and I'm trying to shut you down. This guy was mad, 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 because I had questioned how he was driving 2 times. And so I'm thinking initially, okay, so I'm standing in my power, right? Because now I've been through coach training. No, I hadn't been through coach training, but I've been through lots of therapy and worked on my stuff really hard through the end of my divorces and all my things. And so I'm really figuring out, right, all these things we talk about in Liberating Your People Pleaser, how to stand in my truth and all these things. So I'm really doing it, right? And so I tell him that it's just not okay to talk to me that way, that even if I've upset him, like this just isn't okay. I don't remember exactly how I said it, but that was my point. Like in my world, there's nothing that I've done that pisses you off that gives you permission to unleash that kind of toxic language and toxic energy on me. Okay. So I say that, however, I say that. And he starts rationalizing and no apology. He just says, but I shouldn't have questioned where he was turning, and he had been driving all day. He got us there safe and sound. He returned us home. Like, what's my problem? And da da da. And as he's explaining to me why it was okay for him to tell me to shut the fuck up, my empathy kicks in, right? Empathy, from some definitions, you'll see different things, but one of the qualities of empathy is being able to take the perspective of another, right? Doesn't mean you stay there, doesn't mean you agree with people all the time, but it's like I get your perspective. Okay, so I get his perspective. I can see where he's coming from, and I know him enough to know some of his hot buttons and things like that, and driving was definitely one of them. So like I start taking that perspective, and as I do that, I allow it to take away, or not really take away, to be stronger, to hold more weight, to be more powerful than my truth of nobody gets to unleash their anger at me that way. Like, you just don't get, that's a boundary for me. You don't get to be angry and tell me to shut the fuck up. That's just a treatment of me that I don't tolerate. Everybody doesn't have to have that same boundary. I know for people, who've grown up in much more angry homes, where anger was unleashing all around you all the time, that maybe that might not be your thing, right? Maybe you don't care. Somebody else could have laughed it off. I mean, one of my girlfriends thought I was completely ridiculous for being bothered by it. Okay. So that's okay. Our boundaries don't have to be understandable or agreeable, whatever you want to say. We don't have to put them up for public opinion, right? But that is my boundary. So what it ultimately meant, if I had stayed with my own truth, if I hadn't silenced my truth and allowed my empathy to make his truth more important, I would have just decided, if not that day, soon after, with some other things that happened in the relationship while we were dating, I would have just decided we weren't compatible and quit dating him. Doesn't make him a bad person. He could have been delightful for somebody else. Maybe he is right now being delightful with somebody else, but not my guy. Okay. And so I would have gotten there much quicker. Instead, I continued with that pattern of, yes, I would speak my truth, but then he would rationalize or justify or whatever. I'd let my empathy take his perspective, and then I would let his perspective be more important than my own. And so it took me about 3 years to get my, and I moved in with them, all the things. We didn't get married, thankfully, but before I realized this person is not a good choice for me. So let's short circuit that pain cycle. Instead of it taking 3 years, I wish I had figured it out faster. So I want you to really think of that, because that to me is not empathy. I mean, we can call it empathy, and this isn't about splitting hairs on the meaning of the word empathy or whatever. It's when empathy gets distorted. So that's what happens really with all things about people pleasing. It's some lovely quality like being compassionate, being a caretaker, having that ability to really be tuned in to other people and what they need, great problem solvers, whatever. And taking the beauty of that quality and distorting it into a way that we as the people pleasers end up suffering. And we suffer because we let that perspective of somebody else, or that need of somebody else's, or wanting somebody else's approval or love become more important than what our truth is telling us we need for ourselves. So that's really the key, is as soon as somebody else's voice, somebody else's need, somebody else's perspective is more important than my own, I am in danger of dropping into unhealthy people pleasing, activities or energy or mindset or emotions, instead of empowered ones. Because as a people pleaser, there's no power. You're doing whatever other people want you to do, need you to do, think you should do, want you to do, whatever, all the things. And there's no power in that. The only power is in staying true to ourselves and then navigating and negotiating the ways that what my truth tells me ends up taking me in a different direction or having a different boundary than somebody around me, my boss, my, coworkers, my best friend, my lover, whoever it is. Then we can navigate and negotiate those as long as we're with another healthy person. When you can't navigate and negotiate with them, then there's this combination of things that could be going on. Either I've silenced myself, which is what I tend to do, or I've stayed in my truth, but the other person won't see or hear me. And so that's something we'll be talking more about as well. I think we just had an episode on being seen and heard, but that's definitely a big theme over these next few months, because I think that as we've gone through the drama of 2020 and we head towards the end of the year with 2020, and just based on what's coming up in my private Facebook group and what clients are telling me, this need to be seen and heard is so big. And because it's intrinsically tied with value. And so this is how all this ties together. And then I'm going to wrap this up for today and just know that more is coming. Value, our own worth, is inseparable from being seen and heard. And when I silenced my own truth of nobody gets to be angry and shout at me to shut the fuck up, when I silenced that and let his truth of all these reasons why I deserved that, I stopped seeing and hearing myself. And so I immediately devalued myself. Now, of course, he also was not seeing and hearing what I was saying. Okay. He didn't see and hear my perspective of how that's too aggressive. It's, undeserved in a situation, especially like that, that was so minor. Da, da, da. He didn't see and hear me either. He also was not valuing me. But you see, it started when I stopped valuing myself by silencing myself. So I'm really intrigued how you see this, how you like this idea of empathy getting distorted, how that resonates with you, because I just have so many people that I'm working with one-on-one or that are in our community who in one way or another, sometimes very directly, are saying, I'm just so empathetic and I'm getting overwhelmed with everything that's going on around me with the pandemic or with, through the election process, through whatever's going on at home, all the intensity that 2020 has brought to all of our lives. And they just feel like it's part of being empathetic. But what I'm suggesting is empathy doesn't mean empathy without boundaries, empathy without borders. Every beautiful quality can get distorted into something that stops serving us when there is no container for it, right? Because otherwise, then I would just allow people to abuse me if they wanted to abuse me, because I can see how they were brought up in an aggressive or abusive environment and that's why they're doing what they're doing. And so I'll let them do that to me. No, that's a distortion of empathy, being able to understand why and have compassion, because abusers, I've never met an abuser who wasn't abused. Okay. So all of it comes from somewhere. And being able to use your empathy to have compassion instead of judgment for that's the sort of the whole and love oriented version of empathy. The distorted version is, oh, I understand how you got that way, and so I'm going to let you abuse me. That's a distortion of empathy. So I would love to hear how this resonates with you, and if you've had this issue, and maybe this helps you understand it better when empathy stops serving you and starts hurting you. So as always, I love your feedback. I love your reviews. We are out everywhere now. The podcast is now on Spotify and Google Play, and it's been on Apple Podcasts. And I have it on my YouTube channel for the video versions, because some of the podcast distribution channels like Google Play and Spotify, they won't allow video podcasts. So I have the video version on YouTube in my YouTube channel, and I'll put the link in the show notes for that. And then these audio versions you can get through all the other channels of distribution for podcasts. And I would love to hear from you, a comment, a review. I had someone message me and say that they listened to a podcast episode and it was like I had thrown them a life raft. And so hearing your comments and knowing that the podcast is helping you in your journey makes my day. So I can't wait to see your review or see your comment and get your perspective on this conversation around empathy. I love you guys. All right. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. Hey, I've got 3 more things for you. One is join my private Facebook group, Liberate Your People Pleaser. We have lots of great conversations. I do Facebook Lives in there, drop in free resources, all kinds of cool things to support you in your journey to liberate your people pleaser. So the link for that is in the show notes. Second, I would love it if you would put a 5-star review on whatever podcast service that you found the podcast on. That would be totally awesome, and I'll give you a shout out on a future episode. And last but not least, if you've got a question you would like for me to answer or address, you'll also find a link in the show notes to do that. So submit your question and you'll hear me talk about it on a future episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. I'll see you in the next episode, everyone. Bye-bye.